Hello and welcome to RV Coffee Talk. I'm Chuck Woodbury with RVTravel.com, and as you can see, I'm in the beautiful town of city of Seattle here. Look at that backdrop. I'm right out there and in the city. Not out in my RV today. Sorry about that. But we're here this morning. We're pretending we're all sitting around a big coffee table in a small town cafe, so very casual. I've got Dave Solberg ready to go. He's going to talk about his behind the scenes time filming that now infamous Winnebago Man commercial where Jack Rebney became one of the very first YouTube celebrities. He didn't know it. Dave will tell you about that. But his obscenity-laced outtakes from some work he was doing for Winnebago got posted early on with YouTube. And here's that's Dave. That's Jack in action, and I urge you to watch it. We can't show it here because of all the obscenities. It would offend some people, I'm sure. But it was millions and millions and millions of views. So anyway, let me bring up Dave Solberg, and also Dave is our technical editor. So if you have any other questions that you want to ask Dave, that's fine. We don't have to stick to this topic. But Dave, tell us a little bit about set the scene for that day that you filmed Jack Rebney, and you were representing Winnebago behind the camera.
Yep.
So people, please, we want your questions.
Yeah, well, first of all, we got Frank Z is on, and Dr. Avinger from Ormond Beach, and Snoopy. Dave Talenko is here. Hey, how's it going? Glad you joined us. And I'm glad you finished that first sentence. I was going to talk about my behind the scenes of the video, not just my behind. So kind of you paused.
Did I word that wrong?
Well, you finished the sentence, thankfully, because otherwise we would lose our audience.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little background about the video and why I was there is I had worked at Winnebago. I had a gas station, through high school, college, and had my own gas station after that. And I went to work at Winnebago just to be able to play softball, and it was going to be a short time. And I eventually was in owner relations, and I went through warranty and all this stuff. And they started this new program called dealer communications, and we were supposed to go out and educate dealers. And at that time, they just started a new facility called CycleSat. It was a Winnebago subsidiary that did one of the first actual beaming of a signal up to a satellite panel and down to receivers for television stations all over the country. Had nothing to do with Winnebago other than the fact that they lost $4 million building this thing. And so they decided with that, they had a full production facility with that. And they were doing uplinks for commercials for a variety of different Paramount Pictures and cost cutters and lens crafters and stuff like that. And so they decided we're going to do our own videos. And before we'd had an outside agency do it, we had done a little bit inside with a pretty, poor camera system. And so they decided that they went out and bought broadcast quality cameras and lights, and we had this studio and everything. And so they put out feelers for somebody that could write the actual script for this stuff. And Jack Rebney was up in Duluth, Minnesota, and he was working at a TV station up there, and he put together a demo reel and sent it down. And as you can see, I'm going to add this to the stream here. That's one of the outtakes. That was one of his favorite go-to looks. He would just like that, and that kind of meant cut. We found out later, but he looked the demographics. He looked like our buyer, market. He was excellent with writing. He knew nothing about RVs whatsoever. And so the marketing department hired him to come in and write brochure copy and write for these feature benefit videos. They were going to be sent out. We were going to do commercials. They were going to send them out to all the dealers so they could use them, as advertising pieces and feature benefit walkarounds. And this was in 1988, and it was the new year for the 1989. And I'm going to add this. That was the the Chieftain, and it was one of the. It wasn't the first basement model. Bounder kind of came out with that a little bit before that, and we had a couple other ones. But it was unique in the style of it. It was rounded. It was state of the art, and had all these new wow whiz bang stuff. And so that was the big splash, as Rebney was going to do this. And come to find out later, the demo tape that he sent down was actually all fabricated. He was like an early morning coffee talk, kind of like we're doing. And so anyway, they asked me, then they hired me into this dealer communications, and my first job was to go in and be the basically babysitter of this, because he knew nothing about RVs, and our legal department was very nervous about it. But he put on a great show in the interview and the first few weeks when we were writing script. But I could tell right away he knew absolutely nothing about it, and it was gonna be a lot of glossy kind of stuff. And one of the things that we knew is John K. Hansen was the founder of Winnebago, and he hated marketing. He hated advertising. He wanted a big picture of the motorhome in his face, and that if there's anything else in there, it just got squashed. And so that's basically how I got the job, is that they said, well, you were in warranty, you were in owner relations. I knew more about the RV than just about anybody in that circle. And so my job was to make sure he didn't get us in trouble. And it was a very difficult job because he knew nothing about the RV, and everything was this glossy, and basically was saying that it was built so well that even if you smashed into a telephone pole, you would be able to walk away from it. And I thought, wow, we are going to have problems with this. So basically that's how I got behind the job. And so Jack then came in, and he had his own office in the marketing back in the general office area. And he started putting pictures all over the wall of just the demographics of who, he had no pictures of RVs. He had pictures of mature women all over the place. And I'd walk in, he goes, isn't she wonderful? And I'm like 26 years old, like, what? Now I know different, but back then I didn't. So then all of a sudden it was kind of interesting, because he started becoming more comfortable with everybody that was in there, and you'd hear him in his office. All of a sudden, just a big profanity laced sentence would fly out of his office, and all these people in it was an open kind of office setting, cubicles in some places, that were just amazed. So anyway, he started writing that, and we had a crew of there was John, I won't say the last names, and Tony, who you will see. And if you actually go to the videos, Tony Dahl was an intern at that point. And the poor guy was just getting beat up by Jack all the time. He couldn't do anything right. Blamed him for the flies. He blamed him for the heat, blamed him for the hot lights. And keep in mind, this 1988, there weren't the LED lights. There weren't the high definition stuff. We were shooting on, it was state of the art, but it was a Sony tape deck. I think it was either 3/4 beta tape. But with that, you have to light so bright that you have these great big Mole Richardson and Bardwell McAllister movie lights, basically, that would literally make the inside of that RV like 120 degrees, and we'd burn furniture by placing them certain places. And so we'd be sitting, I very seldom sat inside. I was mostly outside behind the camera. And Jack was in there, and he was sweating to death, and he couldn't remember his lines, and he wrote them. And that was one of his big things. He goes, my mind is a piece of, and he would say, how come I can't remember this? I wrote this. I'm losing my mind. And he would say that over and over and over again. And kind of our comeback after a while, when he started doing that, was, oh, wait, we found it here. It was usually outside on the ground. So anyway, just want to look at some of the comments. We got Bob W. is from New York. Ed is from Flynn Springs, California, El Cajon, and Robert. So we got 16 people coming. So anyway, 1989, and again, I'm going to pull this up.
Can I just get in here for a second?
Yep.
If any of you who are watching it, are you familiar with this video? It is famous, but it's
for all the wrong reasons.
For all the wrong reasons. But and Dave, let's talk a little bit about the scene here. Obviously, you could almost tell from watching it that we've all been in that situation where it was so hot and muggy, and there's flies, and there's the scene. But talk a little bit about this. Here's Dr. Avenger says he hasn't even heard about it. Well, go to Winnebago, go to YouTube and type in Winnebago Man.
Okay.
And you'll find all kinds. You'll find the trailer, which has all the bleeps in there. So,
well, let me kind of talk about how that came about then.
Yeah. That's
Jack would go out on.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We'd go out on the set, and it was out at River Oaks. You couldn't run the air conditioner because it was right above you, and it hummed so bad that it would just drown out all the audio in that. The lights were huge bright. The temperature was almost 100 degrees. So inside that rig, it was up into the 110 or even higher. And so Jack would just go into this tyrant of swearing. He even swore at a fly, which I thought was amazing. But the crew couldn't do anything right. Tony wasn't fast enough. Tony, give me a towel. Tony, give me this. Tony, do that. And so one time we got just so frustrated that we threw stuff at him. He wanted a towel, so we threw a towel at him. And at night, then we would go back, and it was just, how do you decompress off all this? And you're thinking, this guy is a nutcase. He's absolutely out of his mind. And so we just cut all the outtakes and put them together on a beta tape. It was called back then. And CycleSet had two subsidiaries at that time, or two offices remote. One was in California, right in Hollywood, because they had Paramount and some of them were out there. The other was out in New York, eventually Chicago. So John would send these tapes out to these two outside locations to say, you won't believe this guy, because we were talking about it, and we'd be on the phone with them out there, and they go, no way. Okay, watch this. So we sent them the beta tape. And these guys just couldn't believe it. So what they did is they made VHS copies of this tape and sent them to all the TV stations, so their director of programming would get this tape, and it just became this after hours kind of thing. Every day we went and shot, we would do a new tape with some new outtakes. And then eventually we put them all together, and it just flooded in the market because, these guys were sending commercials to these different places. Now they sent this tape. These guys were just going, this is amazing, absolutely amazing. And it was kind of a decompression for everybody. And so it sat for a while. Then after he left, they would sit out there all the time. And then I don't know who started it exactly, but there was a movie called The Winnebago Man. And this documentary producer remembered seeing those tapes. And all of a sudden they were starting to come on YouTube. When YouTube first came out, then somebody started posting these VHS tapes of, we called him the definitive Mr. R. That was what our tape was. But then he became the Winnebago Man. And it just flooded the entire YouTube community with this guy just swearing. And one of his favorite lines was, do me a kindness. And I think you used that in one of your things.
I've been using it myself just as a joke.
Yeah, he had all kinds of funny little mannerisms like that he would say, and and you got to remember, we are plunked in the middle of Iowa. John, Kevin, Tony, myself, we were all just good old boys. I think John had some video experience, but none of the rest of us did. I just knew that what you were saying, you couldn't say, and he would get mad at me like, who the F are you? And I was just like, wow.
But Dave, did he, how many times did he have to do a scene before he would get it?
It took us weeks to shoot.
Really?
Oh
Well,
yeah.
this wasn't a one-day thing then,
Oh
huh?
no, it wasn't a one day thing. Because if you look at the outtakes, there are some of them that are out in River Oaks. That was the outside, and that was it's the big uh,
Oh,
field where Winnebago has their Grand National Rally. And some of them were in the plant around. They had the circle of units that were kind of in there, and another one that some were with another couple. We brought talent in, and they just those are the funny ones, because he would go and open up and say something about the undercarriage of the storage in it, and then he'd forget his lines, and then he'd just start swearing. And this older couple, and especially the lady, was like,
yeah, that was pretty hilarious. He didn't care what he said in front of
"Oh, in front of anybody." No, he just went off into that. And so this documentary guy decided he was going to try to find out what happened to him. And so he hired a private investigator, and that guy actually worked for free because he remembered these tapes as well. And they hunted down, all over the place, and finally found him up in the mountains in California, living like a hermit. And they documented this whole journey to find him. And then when they found him, he went into the tirade again, and he was actually on the Letterman show, or no, excuse me, the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And that's in that movie. And they talked about finding him and what he did and the stuff. And at the end, Jay says, "Well, what do you think about me?" And all you heard was bleep, 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 right on national TV. And it was, everybody thought it was.
Then they found him. He was, and by the way, that video, if you type in the Winnebago Man, is available in its entirety on YouTube. You can watch the whole video. That's the documentary that came out quite a bit later than when you filmed this, and it's really interesting. He was quite good, and Jack just died in May, and he was in his mid-90s, and he was blind even when they found him out there in the cabin. He was nearly blind and ornery as can be, as you see in the documentary. But anyway, back to that day. So how long did you plan to shoot?
Well, we were planning to shoot one feature benefit video of the Chieftain and the Sunflyer, and then we were going to do one of the 1989 model year, and that's the one where you see him he's got a couple of Class C's. I think you even had one of those up with the Class C over top. So we were thinking maybe 3 days, maybe a week at the most, and it turned into several weeks of shooting. And I see Robert here saw bits and pieces of it, and there are, I would say there's probably about 8 or 9 tapes of those outtakes, and then I know the one I still have is called the Definitive Mr. R. It's on beta, and it's about probably 12, 13 minutes worth of bloopers, and after a while, we were doing it, and it was kind of funny for a while, but then it just became almost redundant. I mean, the same swearing, it's like different motorhome, same.
Was he a nice guy when he wasn't agitated by his mistakes?
He was very intelligent. He was actually pretty nice. After he kind of got over the fact we weren't, I don't know, it was almost like we were enemies to start with. The camera guys and myself, and we didn't know anything, and we're not in production, and we're not this, and then when I think he finally kind of realized that we were there trying to help, trying to make it look. He knew nothing of these outtakes, absolutely nothing. Nobody said a word about it. We just sent them off, and it was kind of our little secret between the East and West Coast, and but he didn't care much for most of the establishment at Winnebago, because he kind of, I'm intellectual. I'm up here, and you guys are a bunch of idiots. I mean, we heard that many, many times, and I've heard that from other people.
What something I've never heard. What did he do? I mean, he was working at this little Duluth, Minnesota TV station. I mean, that's one of the smallest markets in the country.
Yep.
So it didn't take much to get hired on there, and that's when you found him, and thought he was at he was at a bigger station because
it looked like he was ABC. Yeah.
Yeah. And But what did he do? I mean, he was already middle aged. What did he do before that? Do you remember?
I don't. I know he had done some writing.
Yeah.
I don't know if he had was at an ad agency at some point and wrote copy for brochures or advertising. He was a good writer. I mean, the stuff he put out, and it was kind of ironic because I don't know if I know we sent out the 89 VHS tapes of the feature benefit stuff, but we never ran a commercial. We never did the roundabout one that he had. Partially because of how difficult it was to shoot and to edit all the stuff. And then those 89 models quality was horrible, absolutely horrible. After I got done with this shoot, then I jumped in a 89 Sunflyer actually. And it was this one right here. And you see that a lot in that, in the outtakes of those units. And I took one of those and headed out to Colorado first and then out to California. And I just started dating my wife now, or girlfriend back then. And we went out to Colorado where her parents were at, froze to death on the way out because the cab of this thing had so many leaks in the front that, it was actually end of September, first part of October. And I hit a snowstorm going into Colorado, and it just froze to death inside. And she had to sit with her two daughters, my stepdaughters, back in the bedroom because there was a heater back there. It's called Motor Aid. They would run the dash antifreeze back and put a second auxiliary motor, heater back there. I sat in a sleeping bag driving this thing, freezing to death. And then when we got out there, they flew back home and I went out to California. And I hardly ever trained anybody because I would pull in and these dealers were so mad because the sidewall was delaminating and we had these new compartment doors that were made like igloo coolers. They had that expandable foam in them, but it didn't stop expanding. It was just bubbling all over the place. And so it was kind of ironic. We spent all this money to produce these things and never showed it. And then John Kay came in and axed the whole thing because he didn't like the lifestyle type promotion. He wanted a picture of the motorhome and his face and Winnebago, and that was it. And these were too sappy in his opinion. So,
well, that's the opinion of as someone who's done TV commercials for an RV dealer back early on. And if you ever tried to do a commercial like that, the salesmen were enraged. They want you to jump up and down and go big blowout sale and bring the people in. That's all they cared about. I lost my gig there because I wouldn't do that, but I can get that.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of ironic. We had one year, I think it was just before this, that we had an ad agency come in and do this lifestyle stuff. And it showed, a mature couple by the beach, enjoying themselves with a glass of wine. I mean, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in ad print and commercials and never sent a single one out. John Kay came in and nixed the whole thing. They won all kinds of awards. They submitted them afterwards. They won Telly awards for the videos. They won advertising awards but they never ever ran anywhere because that was his kind of thing. But it was just it's funny today to watch some of these these people shooting videos on their phone and no lights. And back then we had this $40,000 camera and these $10,000 tripods and these movie studio lights that they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment.
You kind of had to back then.
Oh yeah.
There wasn't even 20 years ago. They were still spending a fortune on that stuff.
The interior of those units were so dark, and that was the thing. They wanted to make them feel like a library, I guess, or something. And you felt like you were in a cave, but so you had to just blast these things and it was, now I shoot stuff for the RV Repair Club, and we've got this one LED light that you can put your hand on, and there's no heat whatsoever. And it's just amazing, the technology.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
anyway, so Rebney was, if you find the one that he's battling the fly, I think it is so funny that it flies inside, then all of a sudden outside one comes and they attacked his nose. He just looked at one and just called him an SOB, and with other laced things in there. And we looked at now he's swearing at flies. Okay. So
Yeah, he's kind of famous for the flies and also the F words that were probably a world record for anything that's ever been shared publicly.
Well, and then he would go back, and in my office, I didn't have an office. My desk was out in the open entryway, and he had a desk office in here. And every once in a while, after we'd shoot, and then he'd go in to try and tweak stuff or whatever, and I would go in and try to put my trips together in the training program. I would hear him muttering, and and I would go and I'd peek in, and he'd just be sitting there with his head down, swearing. And it's like,
I wonder, was he married? I'm just curious. Do you know?
He was divorced. He wasn't married when he was there. He was divorced.
That's not a big surprise. I don't think.
No. And he did not socialize with anybody, or he didn't want to talk to anybody. And of course, after the first day when you get called an idiot and all this other kind of stuff, you really don't care to talk to him either. But it was kind of fun going back to CycleSat in the editing room, and just it was comforting to take all this abuse and put it into a demo reel that you're like, oh, they're gonna love this. Nobody will believe it.
Yeah. And it's funny too that when they went back years later, after he was a real celebrity, when they went back in the documentary and found him in that cabin in, I don't know if it was Northern California or Oregon, I've heard both, but he didn't have any idea that he was a celebrity. He knew nothing about, he didn't know what YouTube was, did he?
No, no, he didn't. He didn't.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Standing mannequin, any RV news today? Well, we have news today in our RV travel newsletter, but we usually really don't do news on here. Although there is some pretty interesting news, and I'll just take a real fast break because I just tell you that as a little public service, this was taken in Death Valley, where a 71-year-old man decided to go hiking last Tuesday, and it was 121 degrees, and he went up Golden Canyon, which is a real popular short hike there, maybe a mile in and out. It's where some scenes from the first Star Wars were filmed. Anyway, it was even hotter in there with the canyons, and he came out, collapsed, and died. And that's my public service. I was in Death Valley once when it was 122, and I've never felt anything like that in my life. It was a blast furnace, and they're talking now that it may hit 130 down there in the next few days. So isn't that just crazy, though? I don't know what he was thinking. But anyway, go back to Jack. So what were you saying? Oh, so that I was just going to say that when you look at those videos, they're always blurry. You can tell they came from a VHS tape, and they probably came from copies of VHS tape and then copies of those, because they're really bad, but it didn't matter. The audio held through the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it was shot on a Sony tube camera. We called it the old stuff. Now they're chip cameras. And so this was a tube camera to start with on 3/4 inch, which at the time that was broadcast quality.
That was it. Yeah.
And then we switched to beta, but the 3/4 was put onto a beta tape, and then that was sent to the TV stations, who put it on VHS tape. And then, I would imagine that was copied after copied after copied, and it was sent.
Yeah. Back then you couldn't. Everybody, I think young people today who weren't in broadcasting before digital don't realize that. I mean, today you can copy and copy and copy a digital file.
Right.
And it's the same. But back then
you lose a generation
way down. And
so anyway, I'm not sure what is meant by multiplex wiring. I'm not familiar with that. I guess if you've got a little bit of information about where it's being used, or, multiplex generally means that, I know there's two different types of wires being used in the electronics. One is stranded wire, what might be what you're calling multiplex, and versus the solid core wire. And the difference between those two is that the multiplex, with it being braided, stranded, it's a lot more flexible, so it can weave in and out in different places. I think the solid, you have a better gauge out of it, but wiring in my Tiffin. Okay, so I would say multiplex is probably referring to the fact that it's a stranded, so there's a variety of different streams in that thing. So, but not really sure exactly.
Here, go to Claude. I see you're on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/groups-RV electricity. That's a group with 25,000 people on it, and ask that question there. You'll get all kinds of people who will fill you in.
Yep. I'm a handyman when it comes to wiring. I've never considered myself a certified expert at that. I know enough to troubleshoot and get to a certain point in it, but and some of the wiring, I guess, a little story, when we were shooting for RV Repair Club, we were using a Keystone Raptor toy hauler, and a friend of mine was an electrician, and he owned that, and he was having certain problems with different things, and we would open up the cabinetry and get back behind. He had what was called a cheater vent. It's a vent that comes up out of the wastewater tank, and I believe his was a Blackwater, but since it was located right underneath the kitchen, they couldn't go up to the roof because the counter was right there. You got this open countertop. So they come up to the bottom of the cabinet and they put a vacuum cap on the top of it. And the whole idea is that it allows air in so you can dump your tanks and you don't create a vacuum, but it doesn't allow the smell to come back out. Well, those go bad. They're notorious for losing their vacuum or their seal. And so it stunk. So we went underneath and pulled a couple panels out, and the wiring in there looked like a rat's nest. Absolutely horrible. And my friend, the electrician, goes, "Well, that's not the code." And I looked at him and went, "There is no code in the RV industry. There is no building inspectors. I mean, RVIA has a few codes that you have to use certain gauge and stuff like that, but you can put anything in." So I think multiplex wiring is just another word for confused wiring diagrams.
And they are confused, aren't they?
They are.
It's hard to.
Yep. And they're not consistent. Getting a diagram is almost impossible. Now, I do have to say, Winnebago is definitely one of the best out there in documentation. They weren't before, but you go on the Winnebago site and you go up into the owner's resources, you can get 3D diagrams, you can get wiring diagrams that's specific. They don't really tell you exactly where they go inside. The 3D one's a little better, but that's the best thing that's out there. And we've tried many, many times to get wiring diagrams from other companies, and it's impossible. And I remember when I was at Winnebago, we were told not to send out wiring diagrams, even though we had them, because number one, they wanted to protect the dealer's service network. They didn't want people doing their own stuff. And number two, the legal department said, if you send them wiring diagrams and they mess it up, we have liability. You don't know what their level of expertise is. So, sending somebody the plans for an atomic bomb is not a good idea. That was kind of their saying. But anyway. So I don't know a whole lot more about Mr. Rebney. I do know that they did go back and find him about a year ago. Did you see the YouTube on that one? And they were going to try and have him talk about Walmart, and they had him across the street. It was either Walmart or Home Depot or something like that. They were going to talk about some type of labor issue that they were having, a strike or whatever. And he's across the highway out in this field, and behind him is the whatever company it was. And he starts talking, and all of a sudden the manager of that company comes over and says, "I've called the police. You can't be here." And they hightailed it and ran. So that was kind of funny. So he was still doing some stuff up until, I mean, he was pretty much, like you said, blind as a bat, but he was 93.
I'm surprised he was doing anything. He was so antisocial. It must have been for the money, huh? I mean,
yeah. Well, and it was kind of interesting too, because the last YouTube follow-up they had people that were part of that video, the movie, come back and see him and took him for a ride, and it was pretty interesting. He was still as cantankerous as possible, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, he was a interesting guy, and but definitely ornery.
Yep.
I don't think there was much known about him. I don't think I've never really gone back and searched him to see if his name, except in connection with Winnebago Man.
Well, and I've done it a few times, and I haven't really come up with anything prior to that. So I guess it was pretty low keyed whatever he did before that. But I just remember, the journey of 1,000 steps begins with one. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. You'd like to quote different things, and as he did that, but not if your steps fall off and you fall out of your RV.
Yeah.
And it's like.
By the way, before I forget, if you go to RV, any of you who want to read more about Dave's experience, rvtravel.com, on the front page, you'll see a link to Dave's story that we just posted this morning, where he wrote about his experience. So there's some a little bit more information there. How come there's two RV? I'm looking at the comments here, and two of them came up on that Facebook group.
One of them YouTube, and one of them's Facebook.
Oh, maybe so. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's it. Okay, because we're doing this live on Facebook and YouTube.
Yep.
Well, because we've kind of exhausted Jack and the Winnebago Man, we got Dave here, who's our tech expert. Does anybody have any questions about all 15 of you on right now? You have any questions about technical issues that you might be dealing with?
I'm kind of wondering what Claude's having with his wiring on his Tiffin. Are you having issues with that, or?
Yeah. Did you? What did you write about today? What was in today's issue, Dave? Do you know? Of course, you don't remember because
I didn't do today's issue. I do Monday through Friday, and we had yesterday was the furnace that the dealership had cut a big hole into.
Oh my goodness! Yes, they just. So is that what happens? That some dealerships just they cut into that whole housing there.
Yep.
And I guess they assumed that it was hidden from view, so nobody would see this butcher job they did.
It was a horrible hack job. What happened is that supposedly the dealership, during their pre-delivery inspection, that's called a PDI, found that the furnace wasn't working. And in this model, the furnace was back in the back. It had a rear cabinet with the refrigerator above it, and then underneath was the converter, distribution center, and the furnace. And the furnace didn't work, and for some reason they decided it was the board, so they took the front grill off, cut a big square in the metal housing, and pulled the board out. Didn't have the board, so they put the grill back on, left all the wires hanging, put the grill back on, and said, we owe you a module board. When we get it in, bring it back, we'll put it in, thinking he wouldn't look at anything in there. And he had problems with a couple other things, and one of them was the distribution center was moving in there. They had just stapled it in place, so the staples didn't last. So he pulled the distribution center out, which was right next to it, and he's like, well, what are wires hanging out there? So he pulled the front grill out, and there it was. And he took pictures and he sent it to me and said, "Is this normal?" It's like, no, that is not normal to cut the side of your furnace out, because you're going to have airflow issues, all this kind of stuff. But They just did, it was somebody that didn't know what they were doing and just decided that they were going to cut through it. So we have here.
FZ has something to say there.
Just cut pieces of magnetic sheeting to cover the floor heat diffusers to keep dirt from falling in when not in use. You can do that, but one of the things that I would be very careful of is make sure you take those off before you start up that that furnace. I would say it's probably better to use some kind of a screen or a mesh that doesn't block the flow, because your furnace, there's two things that can happen. Number one is you have to have airflow that goes through there, because you've got a fan that pushes air out and it lifts what's called the sail switch. And if that airflow isn't high enough, it's not going to lift that, and it's going to shut your RV down. The second thing is that you've got to get that heat out of there too, because there's a temperature sensor on the backside of your burner assembly. And if you don't have airflow again, you got those covered, it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter, and then that temperature switch is going to open, and you won't have, your furnace won't work. I see that a lot where people put rugs down, or they shut certain vents because they want more heat in the living room versus other places. But you got to make sure you got some good airflow that goes through there. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem. Claude says, does my surge guard transfer switch guard against power surges? Do I need a separate one to plug into my power cord? If you've got, so I think what you're saying, and you got a Tiffin, I believe that your automatic transfer switch, ATS, if it's a surge guard, it's going to do both. And what that automatic transfer switch is, it's a box. And when you're running your generator's wired to this, and then you've got a shoreline cord. So if you don't have your shoreline cord plugged in, then you run your generator, your box switches automatically, because the generator, when it senses the generator's running, it will switch over to the generator power. That's the default in those. There's progressive dynamics, and if you got surge guard, then it would be south wire. But the minute you shut off your generator, it's going to switch back to your shore cord. And so if that's what you have, it's a surge protector for either one. And normally you're not going to get much of a surge at all from your onboard generator. And I'm assuming if it's a Tiffin, you probably have a 7,000 watt Onan, probably diesel. They do make some gas. Is it okay to run the engine on my motorhome while I am plugged into the 50 amp power? Yeah, you can do that. What you've got is your engine alternator is going to try and put some power into your battery through your alternator, but you should have a battery management switch there that doesn't allow it to overcharge anything. So you should be fine. And Robert says, frameless windows, the vent pane is separating. Is this a common problem? I have not heard of that much. Those frameless windows have been pretty foolproof. I would say it probably is a Lippert. It could be a Hehr, H-E-H-R. They also make them, but Lippert's making most of the frameless ones. And so, I've not seen that happen much. I would give them a call. And Claude says, thanks. You're welcome, Claude. Take a look at that switch, and you should be able, in fact, the box should be right in a compartment, and it'll tell you the brand of it. And yeah, I would say most likely you have an owner's manual for that somewhere in your great big pile of manuals that you have. And Kevin Manning says, greetings. So what else do we have?
Are we the A team? Are we the A team? Is that who we are?
Greetings, A team. So do you want to?
Are we the A team?
I love it when a plan comes together. Isn't that what he used to say?
Who?
An A team. Oh, it was
I didn't know what A team was. Was that a TV show?
Yeah, George Papard and Mr. T.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They were ex-military and went around solving problems. And George Papard had the cigar. Would always say,
"Yeah, Kevin
says
when
a plan comes together."
We're the A team in the RV world, I guess. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. That's very nice of you.
Okay. And Kevin said Lippert purchased a Hehr about 5 years ago. Who haven't they purchased? I guess is is the better way of saying it. So they
Haven't bought RV Travel yet.
Oh, okay. Well, now that we're the A team,
I'll
they
sell
might.
it for a good price.
Yeah.
As long as they'll keep it up ethically, which is
Yes.
one day we're going to have a conversation about all these new websites that are being written by robots that are supposed to know all about RVing. That's the, but that's for a whole other show. Okay, here's Sandra's got a question for you, Dave.
All right. The check engine light came on a 17 Forza 34T, drove 26 miles to a Freightliner shop. Tech read the code as def pump low voltage, probably going to replace the pump, but any suggestions for or where to find wiring and how to trace it to see if it is wiring? First time tech cleared the code, has not returned. So what I would recommend is that you get a hold of Freightliner, their customer service department, and see if you can, you probably won't get wiring diagrams, but they'll help whatever technician is. And one of the things that is challenging, and we've talked about this several times with a motorhome that has a different chassis than the motorhome. An average dealer cannot work on that Freightliner chassis. Not every Ford dealer can work on a Ford chassis. Sprinter, what just came up here recently, we had Peggy with her Sprinter issue, and her Wichita Sprinter dealer, Mercedes dealer, would not touch it. They said they're going to have to pull the black water tanks out of it, black and gray water, and then they won't be able to put them back in after this recall. So basically, she has a van versus a camper. And so I got a hold of my Mercedes rep that I've worked with for many, many years, and they ended up taking her rig to Kansas City, and they towed it there because it kept coming up with the check engine light like you're talking about. And with that one, you only have about 6 starts or 200 miles, I believe it is, and it goes into shutdown mode. So you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere.
You mean wait a minute, when the check engine light comes on, is that common with other vehicles?
It's not common with other ones, most of them, but it is more common with the diesels because when that check engine light comes on, if it's a diesel exhaust fluid related issue, which is DEF, then it doesn't want you to override it. That's the whole thing. They're saying that, okay, if you're not putting DEF in that, then your emissions are going to be bad. So what they end up doing is you get like 6 starts or 200 miles. And then it goes into a 5 mile an hour limp mode. So I had one of these and we put about $20,000 worth of exhaust emissions in it because it kept reading this code, and they would say the NOx sensors were bad. And I was running a company that we had one of these, and we were out in Nashville, Tennessee the first time, and we had to get it towed. And so they put in NOx sensors. We didn't get 400 miles, and it came on again. And luckily he got back here. So we took it to Rochester, 120 miles away. That's the nearest place that would work on it. They said it was NOx sensors again. And so we ended up putting all this money into it. But anyway, getting back to the thing here is that you want to find, and that's why I tell people in my seminars, when you're looking at buying an RV that has a Ford or a Mercedes or Dodge Ram, talk to the dealership about what arrangements they have made for service on the chassis. Otherwise, you're stranded, fending for yourself. You go into a Freightliner dealership, they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand RVs, and a lot of them won't even work on it. So what I would say is, Sandra, if you did get that DEF pump low voltage, and I guess I wouldn't replace the pump until for sure that code comes back up. It has not returned, so don't just start swapping parts. Call tech support at Freightliner for the RV division. Tell them what you saw, what you experienced. And again, don't just start swapping parts, because we swapped $20,000 worth of parts when we finally got the Mercedes rep down there, their national rep, and he said the exhaust system had weakened the metal and was literally doing a chemical reaction, and the whole chamber was giving off a chemical reaction and making those NOx sensors think that we didn't have the right DEF in there. So The dreaded limp mode. Standing Mannequin says, yes, the dreaded limp mode. My 18 FM Nash is from Northwood. Their customer service is excellent. Yeah.
Here, you missed this this comment. That's what they're referring to.
Speaking of purchase, the only remaining RV manufacturers of substance that hasn't been purchased is Northwood Manufacturing in LeGrand. They're still, yep. Well, and I would say that, Winnebago still, I think, is one of the better ones out there. Their owner relations department is very, very knowledgeable and very good. I haven't had the same type of experience with the motorized out in Elkhart, but part of that is just because that the demand is so high, and they've lost some of the personnel that they had there before that. But you look at Thor has bought, now they've got 12 different manufacturers with the recent purchase of Tiffin, or not recent. Winnebago bought the Sunnybrook, and then they bought Grand Design, which I thought was a great acquisition for them to get into the higher line travel trailer market. As I know, for years they tried to get into it, but they don't have the work personnel in Forest City, Iowa. They don't have the facility, and the hardest thing is getting the units to dealers. It is, we're out in the middle of nowhere. So, can I use the inside base of the refrigerator as a point to level the fridge? You can. I would say I usually use the freezer section of it, just because check to make sure that your bottom shelf of your freezer doesn't have a slant to it. Some of them are slanted that if they get any condensation in and it drips down to the bottom, it'll go back to the weep hole and out. So just make sure that that if your coach is level, you don't want to use the dinette because that could be out of level. There's various different things, but I would use the freezer plate on the top of it just to make sure. And the reason you want it level is because you have an absorption refrigerator that has a solution of it's ammonia, hydrogen, sodium chromate, and water. And it heats that up, and it goes up and creates a vapor and goes through the condenser and then the evaporator coil. And then it comes back and forms back into a liquid. And that has to make its way zigzag back down that cooling unit. And if you're out of level 3 degrees side to side or 6 degrees front to back, that will pool and it will heat and it will start to clog your cooling unit. And people don't realize when they bring your units to the driveways at their homes to get them cooled, ready to go on a trip, your driveway is normally about a 6% slant. And you fire it up, you're not living in it, you're not sleeping in it, you don't think about it. And 2 days later, you're starting to clog those cooling units. That's a big problem that nobody realizes because, you're not in it. I mean, they go out and level when they're camping, but bringing it in, cooling it down, sometimes it's 2-3 days that they're doing that. So make sure it gets level. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad cooling unit. My motorhome is 46 years old, so a lot of things have sagged. Well, I'm 64 and I have the same problem. My back today.
I'm even worse.
So Bob here says Muskogee, Oklahoma, 2018 Van Lay Volano. This morning used the toilet and waste ball would not automatically close. Some connection seems to have broke or a spring. I was able to close it by hand. How difficult of a repair am I looking at? You either have a Sealand, there's Thetford, Dometic, there's a couple of out there, and more than likely it's a spring that broke. I would start by taking the housing off the bottom of that unit, and then you should be able to get to the guts where that handle. I'm assuming you either have a handle on the side or a foot release down there that opens and closes that thing up. And normally there's a spring that's just going to bring that back in. And Chuck will get a kick out of this. I actually have a toilet, but it's out in the shop. You've always commented about how I can pull just about anything product-wise.
You can't pull a toilet. Yeah. I did a video once of this couple in a fifth wheel, and they were I found them at a RV repair shop. It was they totaled it. What they did is one of them went to the bathroom before they went out shopping, and they flushed the toilet and then walked out the door and left. And they came back an hour later and the toilet had broken
Hmm.
And the water just kept flowing and flowing and flowing, and eventually filled up the sewer tank, the black tank, and then it went into the whole RV was flooded, and that was just too much. So the message is, make sure before you leave the RV, that your toilet that you just flushed is going to stop.
Yeah. I just saw a Facebook posting this morning from one of my brothers that had somebody sitting on the toilet and said, if you go to the bathroom at 11:59 at night and it turns to 12:01, it's same poop, different day. So
this is why you failed as a stand-up comedian.
they did. So Claude also said, what's your opinion of sealing the outside RV silicone versus ProFlex? I am not familiar with the ProFlex. I just know that most of the people out in the industry are going to use a like 311. NewFlex is one. I think that might be a version of the ProFlex, but I know Winnebago uses 311. And the biggest thing is, though, you want to use non-leveling sealant on the sides. It's more like a toothpaste consistency, so it doesn't run down. And anything that's on the top flat, use a self-leveling, because then it'll do a nice level versus a big glob of stuff. But the other important thing is make sure you get a sealant that is designed for whatever type of material you're putting it on. If it's on the roof and it's a rubber membrane, that's different than a fiberglass. And just silicone in general is not, it's not meant for everything that's out there. So Kevin just said he rebuilt his Thetford toilet, and now that they offer a complete base replacement, just twist off the basin and replace, no individual parts. Okay. And Bob says it's a Thetford style too, with the lever on the side. So that should be easier to pull apart. They do have a really good exploded view of that in their owner's manual. Check and see. You should have one of those in your owner's packet. If you don't, just do a Google search for Thetford owner's manual, and you'll have a nice exploded view to show you where each one of those components is at. I do have to tell you, though, that if it is the spring, take some time to get on and look at some of those YouTube videos that are out there, because it's a little bit of a challenge getting it back into the place. It's not designed to be user friendly. Let's see.
We got about a minute left, so if anybody's got a last minute question.
Okay, so and this might be something to look at, Bob. Is Kevin says that the bottom basin piece is only $80. So I would say if you can do that, man, that would be the way to go, in my opinion. I've wrestled with those things quite a bit over the years. Was able to close it by hand. So maybe it's just, instead of digging into all that stuff, you just screw in a handle that you can manually pull it back and forth. That would be fun. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So
all right.
I think that's it. What are we working on? We had the formaldehyde article did pretty well. Bob says thanks. You're welcome, Bob. And that's about all I can think of right now.
I will just say this, that everybody, I assume most of you are RV travel readers. If you're not, today's issues are news issue, and it's got lots of news. And tomorrow's issue, I was looking at it just a little bit ago. It is just packed with good stuff. So check that out. Some really good stories.
Good.
And
we got a couple coming up too. We got another Sprinter issue where the owner of it periodically it just won't start. He shut it down. It won't start. Does nothing. And then he's found it on YouTube. A few of those things happened, and you wait about 30 minutes, and then it will start up. And so we did some research, and again, I go to my Sprinter technician, and what it is the conductor plate in the transmission gets hot, and it has this cable it's called a neutral cable, so it doesn't recognize that it's in park. It thinks it's in neutral, and so it won't start, and he needs to replace that. The challenge is that every time this happens, then he goes to a Mercedes dealer and they put it on the code. Well, it's working. It's fine. and it has no code that shows up anywhere. So you see a lot of those little gremlins that pop up. So, the thing that I always tell people is make sure you get in touch with the Ford, the Freightliner, the Sprinter technical support for customers and get it documented and start your journey that way, rather than just keep on going back and back and back and back. He's been to the dealer like 5 times and nobody will touch it. So they don't know what it is, but now they do.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today. And I'll see you again next week. And invite you, if any of you want to come on here and join us in one of these programs, let me know. You can come in, and if you've got some good questions or you're an expert in some aspect of RVing, please let me know. Chuck@rvtravel.com, and love to have you just come on and join Dave and me. Remember, we're just sitting there. We're in a small town cafe here. You can tell in my back behind me that I'm in a small town cafe. And
you're at that coffee place called Chuck Bucks, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm just a few miles from the Starbucks World Headquarters. So Chuck has my own brand, which is a blend of cheap coffee, Folgers, and Hills Brothers. That's my. I would never say that around here. Okay, listen, I better stop. I got to go. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll be talking to you in the next day or two. And that's about it for now. One more comment here came in. And Bob Chaplin, thank you. He said he reads the newsletter daily. Appreciate that very much. All righty. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you
Dave,
later.
no swearing until we're off the air.
No swearing.
Okay.
My mind's a piece of...
No Winnebago Man stuff.
My mind's a piece of Thetford.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's all. Bye-bye.